this many people don't even vote Republican in my state. Folks, I want to tell you, I've had an incredible journey, and I want to say thanks to all of you here in Texas. People like Phil King and many, many others who have been so very instrumental in helping us get a message out that the Republican Party is strong only when it remembers its roots of conservatism and its pro-life. I've had so many interesting experiences. When I first started running, what Phil was telling you is not an exaggeration. I not only was sort of subjected to the corner of the stage in the debates, but I go all over the country and nobody knew who I was. And we had a staff that would travel with me, and we were renting a car in Colorado. Went up to the counter, and he had a credit card that had Huckabee for president on the card. And so he went up to make a transaction. This true story, handed her the card and said, we'd like to pick up the car we had reserved. She looked at the car, ran into the machine, looked back there and said, Huckabee for president. She said, Huckabee for president. President of what? Now, things got a little better toward the end, and folks tended to recognize me a little more. And by the time it was all over, I go to airports now, and people come up, aren't you Governor Huckabee? And sometimes they'll say, I'd like to have a picture made, or would you sign this for my son? And sometimes they just say, boy, I'm sure glad you didn't get nominated. So you have all kinds of, at least there's a recognition factor. Now, sometimes that's good. But sometimes people look at me and they know they're supposed to know me, but they just can't quite figure it out. They're not sure if I ran for president or sold a life insurance last year. But they recognize me from something. Now, some of the actual encounters that I've had over the past couple of months, one happened in the Seattle airport when a couple asked, was I the TV anchor for the local news in Atlanta, Georgia? I just looked at her and I said, no. I was asked by a gentleman in Salt Lake City, changing planes there, wasn't I the guy that worked with him up in Ogden, Utah, at the factory? And I told him, no, sir, that wasn't me. And I didn't have the heart to say, no, sir, I just ran for president. I didn't work in your factory. I just said, no, sir, I don't believe I ever worked there. He said, oh, yes, you did. Yeah, you worked up there with me. Okay, right. I worked up there with you. You know it. I don't. So how did I do? Coming up out of Atlanta on a plane, I was in the aisle seat. Big guys sitting next to me in the middle seat. People were coming out the aisle, and many of them were saying, hey, God, good to see you. Good run. And most of them said, well, I know it's not true. I voted for you. Hey, if all the people who claimed to have voted for me actually had done so, I'd be the nominee and the next president. So, people who were coming by and they were saying hi, and this guy kept looking and he was trying to figure, okay, I know this guy must be governor because they keep calling him that, and something about some race he's running. And he looked over and finally, I could see out of the corner of my eye this sort of grin come across his face. And I swear, this is what he did. He turned to me and says, hey, I know who you are. You're Mitt Romney. So I'm sure it won't take long before people will say, I've never heard you or seen you in my life. But let me be very clear with you today. Whether people remember me is not what's important. But whether people remember what made us Republican is very important. I did not grow up a Republican in the little town of Hope, Arkansas, where I was born and raised. The reason I didn't grow up Republican because nobody grew up Republican in Hope, Arkansas. There weren't any. Well, actually, by the time I was a teenager, I think by honest count, there were about 7 people who called themselves Republican. Every one of them had moved in from somewhere else. Not one of them made it to Henson County. And that's the kind of the way it was. My parents weren't Republican. My parents were typical, old-fashioned, old South people who had 3 great heroes. three heroes: Jesus, Elvis, and FDR, not necessarily in that order. And so, like a lot of kids growing up in the Deep South, poverty rampant. My parents having been children of the Depression. They just didn't have a whole lot of good things to say about Republicans. For me to become a Republican as a teenager, I had to break from the traditions, not just simply get into them. I came from a family like so many of you. My father never graduated high school. In fact, nobody upstream from me, as far as we can trace the family lineage, had ever graduated high school. I was the first to do it, the first to go to college as a male in my entire family. My father lifted heavy things. He was a fireman by his primary job and a mechanic on his second job. And it took two jobs, and he barely could pay the rent on the little rent house that we lived in on 2nd Street in Hope. And the only soap we had in my house, I love telling this because it's true, and some of you can identify with it, and if you can, welcome to the America that most of us really appreciate. The only soap we had in my house when I was a kid was lava soap, which means that I was in college before I found out it isn't supposed to hurt when you take a shower. Today, I watch these women that go to the spa and spend big money paying for an exfoliation. Bar of lava will do the same thing. I became a Republican during my teenage years because I realized that I believed some things that no longer made it possible for me to follow the tradition of everybody in my entire family, history, and lineage, or that of my community. And to this day, I am not a Republican because I am organizationally tied to the party structure, but because I am organically tied to the party message. That's right. And I believe that if we abandon our message, our roots, it's not just elections that we need to fear losing. It's our country that we need to fear losing. Say to you that we've got a challenge this year. We're going to be running against a very dynamic, charismatic Democrat nominee, Barack Obama, who has said for many months he wants to bring change to America. And I have no doubt but that if he's elected, he will definitely bring change to this country. I respect his extraordinary skills. I admire and appreciate his journey. Many will talk about this election, no matter the outcome, as being historic because it has